21, 2023 meeting of the new Brunswick Board of Ethics. Mr. Chairman, will you call the meeting to order?
I'd like to call the meeting to order and start off with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to announce and have placed in the minutes that adequate notice of this public meeting has been provided in accordance with the Sunshine Law by publication in the two official newspapers of New Brunswick, which I always forget, and by posting it on the public bulletin board and by being on file in the city clerk's office. Okay, I guess I'll call the roll. Barbara Blackwell.
Here.
Anthony Jones.
Here.
Angel Ramon.
Here.
Dante Cabbage.
Here.
And Monica Reyes.
Here.
Old business, it lists amended complaint filed by Charles J. Cradville against John A. Hoffman, amended complaint filed by Charles J. Cradville against Yacina Medina Hernandez. Okay, you've all received copies of those. They were duly filed with the city clerk. I sent you a draft resolution in the matter of John A. Hoffman and Yacina Medina Hernandez. I think you all got copies of it by email. I won't read the entire resolution since you have copies of it, but it simply recites that the complaint was filed July 12, 2022, and the amended complaint was filed on October 4th, 2022. It further recites that the two respondents were served with copies of both complaints, and it recites the various responsive letters that were filed by the attorneys for the respondents. And it recites that at the November 9, 2022 meeting, the subcommittee reported back to this board, and the board went into executive session, and the board decided that it needed to take testimony in order to figure out what's going on in this case, essentially. The respondents, through their respective attorneys, have acknowledged receipt of the amended complaint and waived formal service. And we have physician letters that were filed on October 27th and on January 6th, 2023, on behalf of Yacina Medina Hernandez, and October 27, 2022, and January 9th, 2023, on behalf of John Hoffman. And then now therefore be it resolved, respondents John A. Hoffman and Yacina Medina Hernandez shall appear before this board to give testimony under oath and answer any questions of the board regarding these matters at a time and place to be determined by the board, with John A. Hoffman being represented by John E. Hogan, Esquire, of the firm of Valence, Goldman & Spitzer, and Yacina Medina Hernandez being represented by Joseph A. Manfredi and/or Jennifer Barnes, Esquire, of the firm of Manfredi and Pilecki. Somebody want to move the resolution?
Someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Do we have a second?
Moved by Barnes.
Second.
Blackwell.
Do we have a second?
Second, Donna Pincavage. I guess I'll do better roll call. Barbara Blackwell.
Yes.
Anthony Jones. Jones,
Yes.
Angela Ramon,
Yes.
Don Buchanan. Yes. Monica Reyes.
Yes.
The next item on the agenda, find it. Oh. Is the hearing, trying to start with the hearing on these two matters. So I guess counselors, you would just like to put your appearances on the record?
Jennifer, good evening, members of the board. My name is Jennifer Barnes. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Manfredi and Pellecchio, and we represent Commissioner Yesenia Medina Hernandez.
I see the commissioner is here this
Commissioner's here.
evening. Thank you for appearing.
Good evening. My name is John Hogan. I'm an attorney at Wilentz, Goldman & Spitzer in Woodbridge, New Jersey. I'm here to represent, an honor to represent my client, John A. Hoffman. It's an honor to be before this board, and I thank you for having us and inviting us to answer your questions tonight.
Thank you, counselor. Thank you for coming. Okay. I'm just going to suggest to the board that we proceed, if you grant me the opportunity to ask some preliminary questions, and then you can ask such questions as you want to. And then at some point, I don't know if we're going to decide this case tonight, but at some point they'll want to go, the attorneys will want to probably make a summary statement on behalf of the clients after the testimony, and then we'll go into executive session for discussions, and then decide how you want to proceed from there. Okay.
So do you need a motion to offer,
Motion to open the public hearing, I guess, would be appropriate.
yeah, can I get a motion to,
Motion to go to public hearing.
do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Note here.
Just pause for 1 second.
Sure.
Check it.
Yeah, it's gotten hot again. Probably has a window.
Might I open this window here? Would that be okay?
That'd be great.
Sure.
As long as it's not too cold out.
Probably the secret to opening these windows.
To crank
I
it.
made
Ah, there we go. The crank house. There you go. It's well hidden behind the
Who
curtain.
made the motion?
I come on.
Barbara? And second.
Monica.
Monica? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Maybe let's do a little housekeeping before we get into the questions. Let's give some exhibits to the court reporter. I don't know how you want to mark these. The first exhibit is Mr. Cradaville's complaint dated July 12, 2022.
Should I put a marking on it now, or you want to just?
No, you can mark it now. It's up to you.
It's up to you, I have to dig in my bag, I didn't take out my
As long as you
stickers.
know what you're going to mark.
Can I just mark this tab here?
Yeah, sure.
Tell you.
Do you want to leave stickies?
Oh, if you have, well, no, there's
No,
some
sure,
on
sure.
there, I have exhibit stickers, but they're buried in my bag. Can I just write on this for them?
Yeah.
And do you want to just make it exhibit 1,
Or
or?
C1, complaint? No? C1?
Okay, just I'm gonna label it just preliminary.
And the second exhibit is Mr. Cradville's amended complaint dated October 4th, 2022, which is more voluminous. C2, I guess. And the next 3 exhibits are filed on behalf of Commissioner Yesenia Hernandez. The first one is a letter from Attorney Joseph Manfredi. He calls it a preliminary position letter dated August. Didn't have any date on the letter, so I attached the email, which is dated August 11th, 2022, about R1.
one of you made the initials of last names, this is two respondents.
Okay.
MH1.
RMH1, great. Can we do that? And next is a letter from Attorney Manfredi dated October 27th, 2022. He calls that position letter. That's RMH2. Finally, a letter dated January 6, 2022, supplemental response, MH3. And then we have, on behalf of Respondent Hoffman, a letter dated August 11, 2022 from John Hogan, Esquire, and he calls it a request to dismiss the complaint. So we'll call that
JH1.
JH1. And next is a letter dated October 27, 2022, again from Mr. Hogan. And it doesn't really say what it is, but it's a letter, a responding letter to the amended complaint dated October 27, 2022. So that would be
RJH2.
JH2. And finally, a voluminous document which is labeled Verified Answer to Amended Complaint, signed by Mr. Hogan and attested to by Mr. Hoffman. And it's, we'll call that
RJH3.
correct. Thank you. So I think that takes care of the housekeeping. So why don't we start out by asking some questions. The board doesn't object. I'll just start out.
Would you like the witnesses sworn, Peter?
Yes, you want to do it. Would you both raise your right hands? Do you swear or affirm that you have the testimony you will give in this matter will be the truth? Yes, I do.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Who wants to be first?
Commissioner, whoever you prefer.
Commissioner would like to go first.
That's fine.
Want to be first? Okay. So there's a number of allegations in the various complaints that I would just like to go over with you. How long have you been on the board of, as a board of commissioners? Is that the correct terminology?
It's Housing Authority.
The Housing Authority?
Yes.
Board.
Yes.
Do they call them commissioners?
Yes, we're board commissioners. Yes.
So how long have you been on the board?
It's going now about 3 years.
3 years.
Another roughly.
Okay. And there's some statements in the complaint to the effect that you left out certain information on your financial disclosure statements.
That was in completing those forms, and some of those forms I didn't understand completely, so all those forms were taken care of, that I completed it.
Okay, I was going to ask you, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Have the forms been corrected?
Yes, the forms have been corrected, all forms have been
And
corrected.
approximately when was that done?
That was done, I had gotten this complaint back in October, so immediately after that, I went and checked the files, the information, and that was completed. So if you were to go on to see, you will see it's updated.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah, one of the allegations was that you didn't list your husband's employment, income, so that's been taken care of?
All
That's
that has
done?
been taken care of.
And what was the other information that you didn't put down?
It was her own employment in 2018
With the,
with our WJ, right?
with our,
Yes, all of it's
Yes.
been, all of it's been taken care of,
Okay.
yes. And it's, again, the misunderstanding of those forms, not the greatest when it comes to things like that, but all of it, including up to the point that if my daughter had a job currently at that time, and this was in high school, I added that information on there as well too. So husband, any other thing, so then all that was covered in there, so
so if we were to look up the various forms,
it's all been taken care of,
they would
yes.
all be complete,
Yes,
to the best of your knowledge.
yes.
Were you intending to conceal any of this information?
No, not intending to conceal any of the information,
It
no.
was just an inadvertent omission on your part?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your job with the hospital.
I work under the Department of Community Health Promotions Program. I'm what's called a program coordinator. I heavily work with various organizations within schools and work in promoting community health resources. So, and also within my department, I work with my fellow colleagues anywhere from our Latino Diabetes Awareness Program through health screenings and also in nutrition. So it's a various components of what's done. And that's also reaching out through different areas, not just not only in the New Brunswick area, but our neighboring areas as well too. We've done in Franklin. And I also work in doing community health fairs. And at the time when there are various programs, such as during COVID time, we worked with, worked completely during COVID time in providing food resources to individuals and also health and vaccine information as well too and everything like that. So that happened as well. So that's part of our community health that we do as part of being program coordinator.
That's fine, thank you. By the way, just for simplicity purposes, when I refer to the hospital, I'm meaning RWJ University Hospital. And then if I say Barnabas, I'm referring to RWJ Barnabas Health. So it's just a little easier just to say hospital and Barnabas. Don't get confusing enough. Try to keep it as simple as we can. Are you involved in any way with the management of either RWJ Hospital or Barnabas?
No, I'm not.
I know your job, I'm sure, is a very important job, but in terms of management or control over the overall operations of these two entities, do you have any connection with that at all?
No.
With regard to the Plum 2 as it is. That's the right term. What can you tell us about Plum 2? What was the purpose of it?
The Plum 2 project, that, the location where the open parking lot was. Sorry, I have to just refresh. The
There's
Plum 2
Plum 2
project,
and then there's the hub. But I'm questioning about Plum
Yes.
2.
that location is just medical offices, that's it.
Okay. So, when did Plum 2 start getting discussed?
The first that I heard was at, I did not hear that as far as in the hospital setting, if that's what you're asking. I heard that at more, the board, when we had our monthly board meetings.
So when did the board first start talking about Plum 2?
We did not have a discussion beforehand. It's done at the meeting. When we see the information, we get our information,
Okay.
our packet as we always get, and then if any questions come up, and then it's brought up at the board meeting.
You know, there's a myriad, and I'm sure you've noticed that, of different entities that are involved in redevelopment in New Brunswick. I mean, it's just mind-blowing how many different entities are involved, and maybe you're not the right person to ask, maybe Mr. Hoffman is, but there's just so many entities, so many things going on. I don't know whether that's for tax purposes or liability or development purposes or what, but it's just, it's very confusing to the board trying to figure out which entity is which, who's doing what and why. How much discussion was there at the board about Plum 2 and what it was for? And if you recall, when was that discussion?
I don't recall when that discussion was. I would have to go back and to looking at my minutes, my information and everything, so I don't recall offhand because there was so much that we do discuss. So, but I know when the resolutions are brought up, at any point in time, then it is open up for questions for board members. Presentation is first done, and then it's open up for questions, and any thoughts of what is involved.
Okay. At the time that there was a redevelopment agreement that was presented to the board, correct? At some point for Plum 2?
Yes.
And was that in January of 2022?
January 2020.
2020?
So, yes.
Well, I'm referring to the complaint. On January 26, 2022, Ms. Medina Hernandez chaired the meeting where Hoffman presented resolutions for approval by NBHA Board of Commissioners to facilitate the hub.
That's a different
Oh,
project.
sorry, that's a different one. Okay. So Plum goes back to 2020, if you remember. If you don't, just say you don't.
Don't remember exactly, but I know what you're talking about as far as with times and stuff. I would have to look and see, but I know what you're talking about. So.
When Plum first came up, was there discussion about what entity, if any, would ultimately be occupying that facility?
There
Or
was a
it?
question, yes, there was a discussion of who would be there. Yes, it was, because it's for medical offices, and it's for also medical areas there, and also even the medical school utilizing some of it as well too. But that's what it's pretty much for, medical offices.
Was any particular, and I know the parties that were in the agreement were just redevelopers, I guess. Was there any discussion about what entities would actually be occupying these facilities, this facility?
There was discussion, yes, and if at the point in time that you're asking if it was that Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital would be part of occupying it, yes, it was discussion on that.
Ms. Medina Hernandez, if you can keep your voice up for me, just, it's a little difficult because you're just across the room, so you can just keep your voice up.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank
Sorry.
you. No, you're fine, thank you.
Most of my questions are going to be for Mr. Hoffman, so why don't I defer to the board and see if you have any questions you want to ask Commissioner Medina Hernandez at this time.
Yeah, I have some questions.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not familiar with what happened with Plum 2 per se and any hearings on that, but I did, your attorney sent 2 links to videos for Hub that I'd watched. And in those videos, they were in 2022. One was in January and one was in May of 2022. And this is regarding the Hub building, not the Plum. In the first meeting, I think it was Mr. Palladino, if I'm correct, gave a presentation. And in that presentation, he did indicate that Robert Wood Johnson, along with Hackensack Medical, Princeton University, Rutgers University, and a number of organizations would be a part of Hub 2. And at that time and in that particular meeting, you abstained from voting. And it's my understanding that you abstained from voting because you felt that there might potentially be a conflict of interest with your employment at Robert Wood Johnson. Is that correct?
Yes, and then with the Hub, then in understanding further, it's RWJ Barnabas that is involved with the Hub, not Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital.
Yes, okay.
So that's
And so
why the
that's why
second
on the second,
with the with what indicating what changes were going to be done, and that's why in the second, if you saw that I voted yes with the
okay, so
changes.
your
Yes.
employer, Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital, or the hospital as we'll call it, was not a part of the Hub.
No, it's RWJ Barnabas Health.
Okay, and what is your understanding of the relationship between the hospital, and Barnabas Health System?
We're just one of the entities, one of the hospitals under RWJ Barnabas Health. RWJ Barnabas Health has other hospitals throughout the area of New Jersey. If you see like Trinity in one area in New Jersey, New York. So we're one of the hospitals. So that's why we are still Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital. And I know it can be confusing because you see RWJ and it's automatically looked at that it is Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital.
It is very confusing.
Yes.
I can tell you that. RWJ Barnabas Health is sort of like the a parent company, correct? And then all of the hospitals under them are subsidiaries or, I don't know what other term you might want to call it, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I understand that, it's my understanding at least, that you did vote for it because you felt that there was no conflict in that second meeting under the hub, correct?
Yes.
I have a series of questions.
While you're
but I-
thinking, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Just with regard to the hub, it appears from my reading of the letters submitted that either Barnabas or the hospital would be occupying a very small portion of that facility. What I read was less than 1%. Is that your understanding also?
No, that's not my understanding, no. I wasn't aware of that at all. And for more of a sense of, I know that the medical school would be there, and then the other components are there as well too. And then I know that the main, though, it's under RWJ Barnabas Health.
Is the medical school part of Barnabas?
No, medical school's totally different. That's under Rutgers, is not under Barnabas, no. Medical school is with, is the Rutgers Medical School, that's with them. It's not under Barnabas, no.
Okay, well, maybe we need to clarify that issue because it was my understanding from reading the documents submitted that Barnabas occupancy of the hub was to be less than 1% of that facility.
Yeah, that was my understanding too.
It's our understanding.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe there's a
I think if you
mix-up.
distinguish between the hub and Plum, it's different.
Plum is different. It's very confusing.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I recognize that, but that was my understanding from reading the submittals.
So, as I said, I'm not as familiar, because I did not watch any of the videos, I didn't have any linkages or anything for the Plum, but it was your testimony that you were aware that the university was going to be part of Plum?
It's with the medical offices, so as far as, that's what that center, the Plum Street is used for, is for medical offices. That's what it was deemed as for.
Medical
So-
offices from the hospital or medical offices from private physicians
No, no,
or
no.
medical offices?
The hospital, in the hospitals, medical offices.
Now, since you have been on the board, the housing board,
Yes.
have you had any training on ethics or conflict of interest or appearances of conflict of interest or financial disclosure forms or anything like that?
As part of becoming a commissioner, there are a certain amount of trainings that I have to have, yes. So I had on conflict of interest and on ethics as well too. And on the financial forms, we did not. That was a new concept and everything like that. And so that's something that, again, now that it was taken care of, as I stated before, and it is something that it's very highly paid attention to now.
I don't have any more questions at this
Okay.
time.
Do any of the other board members have questions?
I do not.
Okay. Would you like to ask your client any questions on redirect, I guess we'll call it?
Sure. Commissioner, as soon as you realized that there was some information missing from your financial disclosure form, did you immediately take action to rectify that situation?
Yes,
Did you amend all of the forms in 2018 through the present?
yes,
Okay. In your capacity as the program coordinator for the Community Health Promotions Program, do you report to any board members?
no, I do not report to any board members.
Are you in any direct line of supervision with any board members?
No, I'm not in any direct line of supervision.
Okay. Did you know whether Mr. Palladino, who was involved with the Hub project, or Mr. Morris, who was involved with the Jersey Handy and the Plum project, did you know that either of them was on any Robert Wood Johnson board?
No, I wasn't aware that either of them were on any board.
Okay. And you have no interaction again with the Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health Board?
No, I do not.
You have no involvement with the Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital Board?
No, I do not.
Okay. Was your employer, Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital, ever an applicant before the New Brunswick Housing Authority?
Can you clarify that question?
Did the hospital ever come before the board with an application asking for the board to perform any action?
Oh, no.
Okay. Was Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital ever a developer of any of these projects? Did it come before the board seeking to develop a project?
No.
Did Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital ever serve as a core partner with any of the developers for these projects?
No.
And then if I could just direct you to the couple of exhibits we have quickly, sorry. So this is the flow chart that was provided to us by Sharmila Japersad, and she is the senior counsel for Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health's Office of the General Counsel. We reached out to her and we asked her to clarify your position in the hierarchy of Robert Wood Johnson. And she explained that Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health is the parent company and Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital is a subsidiary entity. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So looking at the very big, I don't know why they made it that big, but they made it very big, organizational chart.
Do you want to mark these as exhibits?
Yeah, that'd be great. We could do, I guess, MH 4 and 5, and then this would be 6, I guess. But, so that's 5, I guess, right? So looking at exhibit MH5, at the very top, can you read what that box says as the parent company?
Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital.
Okay, and then-
501c3.
Okay, and then, I apologize, there's not a lot of room here. Okay, if I may. Could you show me, if you could just point to where your department lies on this organizational chart?
We're in this area here.
Are you even shown on this organizational chart?
We're not. We're in this area here. We're a community health promotions program. So we are within the fitness and wellness center area.
Okay, and
We're
how,
not- our
So
community
this is
health
pointing
promotion.
to the lower right-hand
Lower-
corner
Yes,
right.
of the
yes.
schematic?
Community health promotion program, as I see here, it's not listed at all.
So it's not even identified in the organizational chart at this point.
Just looking here, is what we fall under is. No, I don't see us here.
So wellness is-
Wellness is here,
Down
and we
here.
work with, yes, because we work with the wellness center as well too. But community health promotion program is not here on the chart.
Okay. And how many layers away is your department from the Board of Trustees of Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital?
We're all the way down here at the bottom.
Is there any way that you could have had any financial or employment-related benefit as a result of having voted in any resolution concerning any of the developers in the complaint or the amended complaint?
No, no.
Okay. I'm good for now. I'll give a closing statement later if I might, but.
Yeah. Just one question. Is there any personal benefit that you could have received from voting on this matter from the
No.
hospital?
No, that is not me, and I would not do that, no.
Okay. Any other questions?
No.
Not at this time.
Okay. So let's talk to Mr. Hoffman. Thank you for appearing tonight, Mr. Hoffman. Could you tell us a little bit about your positions with Barnabas and with RWJ Hospital as trustee?
I'm a trustee of both.
And how,
Barnabas, which is the parent,
then Robert Wood Johnson, the hospital, which is a subsidiary.
And how long have you been on each board?
Robert Wood Johnson, probably approximately 20 years. And Barnabas, there was a merger with the old Barnabas system and the Robert Wood system, and that happened about 7 years ago. And 10 of the trustees of Robert Wood Johnson went on Barnabas at that point, but the merger occurred.
So that's when you became a trustee?
That's when I became a trustee of Barnabas, when the merger happened. Part of the merger agreement was that both sides would have 10 trustees as a member of the parent board.
And I read somewhere that you were also the treasurer of...
Treasurer Robert Wood Johnson, I don't know if, I was the chairman back in the early 2000s, and I've been the treasurer on and off for the 20 years.
What does a treasurer do?
Well, it's a form, I don't do anything as in an operational standpoint. I'm a trustee, so the treasurer, I really do finance. There's a finance committee, and when the committee makes the people who work for Robert Wood Johnson make financial presentations every month. They make them. They just have committees, and I'm the treasurer with the head of the finance committee.
So it's sort of a figurehead position, or?
Yes, I mean, they call me and say, here's the financial statement, here's what we did. And then we have a committee meeting once a month, once every 2 months, and at that committee meeting, they make the presentation to the finance committee, and I'm chairman of the finance committee.
And do you receive a salary or financial compensation
No,
from?
none whatsoever. In fact, I contribute probably 20 times more than, I did check off that we get some reimbursements, and I was being very cautious because they provide fruit, cheese, water at meetings. Once a year we may have a dinner that they pay for, and then they gave me a jacket with Robert Wood Johnson on it. It actually didn't fit me, but it was a rain jacket that I got. So just to be cautious, I put down, that's what I don't receive or charge them if I drive anywhere. They don't get mileage. So the only thing we get is, as I say, the fruit and the cheese and the crackers.
So other than incidental gratuities, it's totally voluntary?
That's correct.
You're called special counsel to, well, not you, Willents, you're going to tell me, the Willents firm. He's called special counsel to the board. How long have you been doing that function?
The Housing Authority acts as the redevelopment agency for the city of New Brunswick.
Right.
So acting as the redevelopment agency, they go off for redevelopment council. My recollection is that the firm is redevelopment council for approximately 40 years. The first project I remember is the Hyatt Hotel back in it was either the late 70s or the early 80s.
And, well, that's a long time. And
It just shows I'm old.
yeah, in those 40 years, how many attorneys have served in that function for Willents?
Well, there's different parts of functions, but I do redevelopment work, but there were probably 3 or 4 who have made redevelopment presentations. But for example, in a redevelopment project, there may be acquisitions, there may be condemnations. There's another lawyer who would do the condemnations. There may be, so there's different lawyers who play different functions. I would say there are three lawyers that did the redevelopment function over the 4 years.
Who was the point person, I guess?
This would be me.
Yeah, and that goes back all those years?
Well, I started it, and then there was a gap where, not a gap, there was a time when a woman named Yvonne Marcuse did the bulk of it for years, but she retired, and then I kind of came back.
Okay.
She was with the firm, correct?
She was with the firm. She was a member of the firm. That's correct.
Can you just give us an overview? There's such a myriad of different entities involved in redevelopment, and it's so somewhat mystifying.
Peter, do you think it would be helpful if you explained how the redevelopment process works? Because I feel there may be a missing piece there that might help everybody understand
Sure.
this process.
Absolutely.
How the redevelopment process works is as follows. The city, being the city council and the planning board, is as part of that, will determine that an area is an area in need of redevelopment. They'll look at it, it has to be certain criteria. It has to be buildings that are in, say, disrepair or vacant land. So the city, through the planning board, who has a hearing, makes a determination, here's an area in need of redevelopment. The redevelopment agency, which is the Housing Authority Act, what they do is implement the plan. So that a developer will, most of these developers own their property. They will come in, make an application. They'll file it with the Housing Authority, and there's an application form. And the key issues are, what's your experience in development? What's your financial wherewithal? Can you complete this project? And what's your timetable? What you don't want is somebody to appoint as developer and they're speculative and just hold it for 20 years. So those are the key elements. They make that application, filling all that information out. What I do is I look at the information. When I introduce them to the board. I say, I looked at the plan and I looked at what their application is. They want to build an office building. That's permitted in the plan. And then after I make an introduction, I introduce the developer or their attorney, and they make a presentation. They explain who they are, the experience they have in residential development or office development, how they have to have their financing. Either they have preliminary financing now, and they'll come back later and they'll do the financing. The board then hears comments, answers questions from the commissioners, some questions from the public, and then takes a vote. That's the first stage. So now there's a redevelopment. And usually the redevelopers, the reason why you see these different names is that once you become a redeveloper, you can get tax abatement. That's handled through the city council. The redevelopment agency has nothing to do with it. But you have to be an urban renewal entity certified by the Department of Community Affairs in order to get tax abatement. So
This is before any property has actually been acquired.
Well, before you start your construction, if you want a tax abatement, where you appoint the redeveloper, there's then usually a 90-day period for a redevelopment agreement. And the redevelopment agreement really sets forth the responsibilities with the developer. And it'll say, what are you going to build? How long is it going to take? What's the cost going to be? You can't assign it to anybody else except without the consent of the Housing Authority or the redevelopment agency. Here's a default, what happens on termination, and it has in it, once the project is built, the Housing Authority, at the request of the developer, gives a certificate of completion. It's almost like you get if you're building a building. And when that completion happens, the Housing Authority role, except for the certain covenants that they filed, which would prohibit discrimination and things of that nature, the Housing Authority ends. Once the building is built, and with the certificate of completion happens, they have no more jurisdiction. And then the builder goes on, he leases it, does whatever he's going to do. But the reason why you have all the entities is the developer then goes to the council and says, I'd like a tax abatement. So I grant it, some or not, I don't know what the council, I have nothing to do with it. And the council grants a tax abatement to that Somerset Urban Renewal LLC, because of the fact that the developer will set up, for each entity, sets up a different entity, for each project.
You read about a collaborative process where you've got a whole laundry list of entities, the city, some universities, Barnabas, a whole list of different entities that are involved in these. What is their role in these?
Well,
in
their
the
role,
redevelopment process?
the only entity that comes before the redevelopment agency is the developer. Now, there are other roles that they may be or may not. I'll give you an example. On the hub, they may or may not be tenants. I finally asked Robert Wood, do you have a lease? They have no lease. This is the developer saying, I hope to have Robert Wood Barnabas as a part of it. And as the letter, if you read a letter from the DEFCO attorney, as you pointed out, they're less than 1% of it, if they ever do it. They haven't done it yet. The biggest part of that project, which is a 570,000 square foot project, is Rutgers. Because they're going to have their labs there for research, and they're also going to have the medical school, which I think will take 180,000 square feet. That's the bulk of the project. But where the confusion is, all I deal with and all the commissioners deal with are the developer. And our agreement is with the developer, and if the developer, if he defaults or does anything wrong, that's who we would have the relationship with, and that's who we would go after. Now, we don't look at the tenants. I mean, I'll give you an example. There's two big residential projects, 540 units. Are we supposed to look and say, well, is it possible Peter may rent, so therefore maybe I know Peter, so I should recluse myself? How would anyone even know that? So that the tenants, we don't even consider, we just deal with the developer.
So the purpose of the redevelopment agreement is what, to guarantee that the redeveloper will complete?
It guarantee that the redeveloper will complete the project, and that he has the wherewithal to complete the project, and has convinced the commission that he has the financing to commit the project, and that he will not discriminate on the project, and that he will not assign it to anybody else, because you want to deal with somebody who's qualified. You want someone who's done development. You don't want to deal with somebody who's speculative, because that's not what redevelopment's for. So they have to be, the commissioners have to be satisfied and with the application that.
So that's why you have another entity as a guarantor?
That's why
in
I
agreements?
usually insist that an entity that has other assets guarantee the project.
Is there bonding of this, or is it just a financial analysis of the guarantee?
Usually, these are private developers, so there will not be, there's no municipal bonding. These are private developers, so developers will get, usually it's bank financing. They'll put up 30% equity and they'll get bank financing for 70%.
Will there be bonding of external improvements or drainage, things like that?
I don't remember any. There may be, the city incidentally is improving all around, but we haven't, as in my experience, we have not put in a commitment where the housing authority doesn't have the kind of assets that they can do it. So, I mean, the housing authority, is primarily a housing authority. When the redevelopment agency, it's really a pass-through. It doesn't have a lot of assets.
So the collaborative entities, and there's a laundry list of them. It seems to be, the city, and then something like DevCo, which is in turn.
DEFCO is a nonprofit corporation.
Yeah.
And what it has done, it's a development arm of the nonprofit corporation. It has developed many of the projects. I think there was a list of them in the letter, but look at Gateway, look at Performing Arts Center. They are, Chris Palladino, and they are developers. And they get, most of the time, they get tax increments, they get different kinds of financing, different kind of tax benefits to bring projects along. But they're not affiliated with Robert Wood Johnson. They are a completely separate nonprofit corporation with its own board.
So from the point of view of the board, and you representing the board, your primary concern is whether this thing is going to get built as promised. Or
That's the primary concern. That's the major concern. That they have the expertise to do it and that they will do it. And then what the remedies will be if they don't do it, or if they try and assign it, that they can't assign it to some fly-by-night organization without going back to the board to say, we'd like to assign it. So that's who the board deals with, and that's who I deal with. I don't, whatever tenants they ever have, it's none of my business. I don't we don't even present it. Palladino may say, we're considering these kind of entities because this is supposed to be a hub. So he's trying to show that Princeton University will be involved, Hackensack will be involved, the Meridian will be involved, Rutgers will be involved, so that they can bring a lot of different entities in. But that's all done by DEFCO. Housing Authority has nothing to do with
Your office, does your office write the redevelopment agreement?
that. Yes.
And then you have, is it more or less somewhat boilerplate and then?
I'd say 80% of it is technically is boilerplate, and there's two different, there's one where we would, Housing Authority, redevelopment agency may acquire property, that's a little more. In other words, the redeveloper cannot acquire property, he may have 80% of the site and say, I negotiate with these people, I can't. So under the redevelopment plan approved by the city, where we could condemn property on behalf of the redeveloper.
An area in native redevelopment is what we used to call a blighted area back in the day.
It's similar.
Yeah.
There's two. There's one where you can condemn property and one where you can't. We can just rehab. So there's two different.
Did you do both kinds in New Brunswick?
Most of them are acquisitions. But most of the original redevelopment plan was 40, 50 years ago. And I think that at that point, they blighted almost the whole downtown. If you were alive back then, you would notice that there was a lot of, New Brunswick has it's just improved so dramatically through redevelopment.
And a lot of changes.
Yes. Now, I don't, so just to clarify, I have no economic interest at all in any of these projects. I am a non-paid member of Robert Wood Johnson and of Barnabas. I don't vote. I don't, as far as the redeveloper, which is probably the key, it's the redeveloper who makes the presentation. I just introduce them. I do negotiate the agreement and explain the agreements to the board, but usually the redeveloper's there also. So if the board has any questions about them on the agreement, they can answer.
Well, the issue would not be, I mean, obviously you have no financial interest. I guess the other issue would be whether you have any personal interest in any particular development, by virtue of.
Well, I don't know what personal, I don't have, I sit on the board,
Yeah.
but the board, the board sets policy. We don't approve leases, we don't approve agreements, we primarily concern with quality of care, things of that nature, to improve the quality of care. And obviously, if it's going to be a bond issue, but now that Barnabas took over, most of the financial stuff, almost all the financial stuff is done up at RWJ Barnabas. Because they're the parent. They really have the majority of the power.
So you as treasurer, you're just dealing with the hospital
Yes,
finances.
that's correct.
I want to ask you some questions about Jack Morris. And he's also on the board of trustees of, is he on both entities?
He's on both entities.
Okay, just like you are.
No, there's like 20 members on all the boards. And many of those members, I have no idea what they do. If their company appeared before the Housing Authority, I wouldn't even know it. I don't go up to people and say, what's your occupation, who do you work for? Jack Morris, I happen to know, he's a developer.
Do you have any business relationship
No.
with Jack Morris?
No.
Do you have any personal relationship with him other than, seeing him on the board?
I see him on the board, he's a friend.
Do you socialize together?
Infrequently. Sometimes after a board meeting, there'll be a dinner with some of the trustees.
So you wouldn't call him a close friend?
He's not a close friend, but as I look at it, it's like tell me I go to St. Peter's Church. Do I have to look at who the parishioners are? So if I know one of the parishioners, is that a personal? And if I know it, is that going to be a conflict for me? I check. John Hogan is general counsel for a firm. I check before we do anything. If I think there may be a conflict, we have a conflict. I've been a lawyer for almost 60 years. I've been on many boards. I've done an awful lot, and this is the first time anybody ever accused me. I'm very cautious to make sure I don't do anything wrong. There's no reason for it. I'm not.
Well, I just, I'm just asking these questions
Sure.
because, I'm
No,
just
I
trying
want
to
to,
clarify.
I'm glad you're asking. I mean, I want to just, want to clarify, because I want everybody to think that, I know when we're doing the redevelopment, if the developer was Robert Wood Johnson itself, I wouldn't do it.
Right. So
And-
there's really no special relationship between you and Mr. Morris?
No business relationship, no economic relationship.
You're not beer buddies or
I don't drink that much beer.
Okay. Board have any questions of?
I do. You,
Sure.
does anybody else want to go before me? Okay.
We're the heavy hitter tonight.
I'm the heavy hitter tonight. Okay. Let me see. First of all, thank you because you did a very thorough report going through each complaint and giving a response to each complaint, and it was very thorough and very thought-provoking. So that really was helpful. But it was also helpful for me personally. I did and just to help me, I did a timeline because there were, things from 2018 to 22, and they were all over the place in the complaint. So for my personal benefit, I did a timeline. Okay? And so I just want to make sure I got things correct in
Sure.
this. Okay? So what I found was that and that there are 4 projects. There's Plum 2, there's the Hub, there's Jersey.
Jersey Handy and Fulton Square.
Yes, correct. Okay. So
By the way, those projects have nothing to do with the hospital. Nothing whatsoever.
I think the board understands.
Yeah.
They're developed, one's a residential project, and one is, there's a Walgreens drugstore and some other,
Okay.
there's some other retail. That was Jersey Handy.
Okay. So this really helped me doing this timeline
Sure.
because I could see, where Mr. Kravidal had, issues in which year. And so I'm going to go project by project,
Sure.
if you don't mind. So we'll start with Plum.
Okay.
Okay. So my reading of it from Mr. Kravidal's complaint was that I believe it was, let me look for a second. I think it was in June of 21, you represented the board at meetings regarding Plum.
Plum started in December of 2019. The redeveloper was appointed at that time. There was January, we came back with the redevelopment agreement of 2020. There was a minor amendment that happened in June. I don't remember, I think what happened is that they anticipated the construction would be done by a certain date, and they came and modified the construction. But it was a minor amendment.
So the last time you represented the board on this was June of 21.
That's correct.
And then in July of 21, according to Mr. Kravidal's complaint, was when Robert Wood Johnson Board first had any mention of Plum.
What happens is on the board, periodically every 2 or 3 years, the administration comes and says, here's some projects we're considering. And they just generally said, here's a picture of a project we're considering, here's another one we're considering, just so the board knows what the projects are. That picture that Mr. Kravidal had of myself at a board meeting was that kind of presentation. One of the presentations was on Plum. That presentation was after
Correct.
all of the...
That was
all
my
happened.
understanding
And
too.
I had some inkling Robert Wood may take a part of it earlier, but also I was told Rutgers was going to take the bulk. Rutgers was going to take the bulk for the medical school. And so, there's a Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. That's part of Rutgers. Nothing to do with, it's affiliated with the hospital because it's a medical school. Their students go through the hospital. That's part of Rutgers. Not,
Yes, so that was my understanding, that
Yes.
your last representation on the board was June that this presentation was in July, and that you have not, or at least in terms of the complaint, there has been no representation
No.
by you since then.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, so then let's go to the next one, which could be Fulton Square in Jersey. And Jersey Handy?
Yes.
Okay. And my questions on that had to do with Mr. Morris, and it's my understanding now that he is a board member, just like these are my board members.
That's correct.
And that's your basic relationship with
That's
him.
correct.
You may see him outside of the board because you're an attorney and he's a developer.
We don't, our firm does not represent him.
And he's not a member of your family.
No. I'm Catholic and he's Jewish.
Still the family?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, so, and it's also my understanding that RWJ, either one of them, is not involved in any of the,
Fulton,
Those-
Jersey, and none whatsoever.
okay. And so your only acquaintance with Mr. Morris is being a board member with him, pretty much?
That's correct. The part of Jersey Handy is where the new school is.
Okay,
Mr. Morris gave the property to the Board of Education.
okay.
And I think DEFCO, as part of the Cancer Institute project, DEFCO is with a contractor, I'm not sure which one it is, built the school.
Okay, so that leaves Hub.
Yes.
Okay, so Hub,
Which is a big hole in the ground.
yeah. In fact, I just passed it coming here. And it's been a big hole for a long time.
That's correct. Since the Ferry Mall was knocked down.
So with Hub, I watched the two videos that the other attorney gave links to. And in those two videos, during both of those meetings, Mr. Palladino described the project, and as I said earlier when I was talking to Ms. Medina Hernandez, they did describe that Barnabas Health would be a part of it. And it is my understanding that less than 0.5%
That's correct.
it's like 2,660 square feet or something like
The
that.
building is over 500,000 square feet. But there's no agreement. There's no lease.
Yeah, I understand
That was
too.
Mr., I don't want to call it puffing, but Mr. Palladino was trying to say, this is going to be a hub, and here's all the kind of empties. We're going to have Princeton, and we're going to have, you know.
I just want to
you know,
make sure,
yes.
make sure that my
Sure.
understanding
That's
of
correct.
it is clear.
Absolutely correct.
Okay. And that Robert Wood Johnson Hospital is not a part at all of HUB, correct?
There's nobody that supports us of that.
Hmm?
There's nobody that supports. There's no legal documents with any of them. But Robert Wood Johnson Hospital
Is not
is
involved
not,
in.
I
It's
have
not
no,
involved
I
at all.
have no knowledge of that being involved at all.
Okay. And currently, there's no contracts, there's no lease agreements, there is nothing.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I think you have a letter from DEFCO's attorney
Mhm.
explaining what the project was and the fact that
Correct.
there isn't any lease.
I'm
It's an
sorry,
exhibit.
I correct myself, it was 2,622 square feet.
It's less, I think it's less than 1/2 of 1%
Correct,
of the building, if the lease ever gets signed.
correct. Okay, so Mr. Manfredi, and is that how you say it? Manfredi, in his letter to the board, and this goes to conflict of interest.
Sure.
Okay, but Mr. Manfredi, in his letter to the board, cited a case law called Gabowski versus the Township of Montclair. Are you familiar with that?
Generally familiar, but Mr. Hogan would be more familiar with that than me.
Okay.
I'm an older lawyer, he's younger, there's a lot of research.
So in this case law, it's basically regarding voting, and I understand you don't vote, you are the council, but you do represent the board.
I do represent the board and
Okay. And there were basically in this case law, the court recognized 4 reasons for disqualifying yourself. Okay, and I'm not sure if I am describing this word correctly, but the first was direct punctuary interest?
Pecuniary.
How do you say it?
Pecuniary, that's a financial
Money.
interest, direct financial interest.
And then there's indirect pecuniary,
Pecuniary.
direct personal interest, and indirect personal interest. Okay, and I'm asking whether you have any of those interests in
No.
the hub building?
No.
Okay. And that's pretty much what I have for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank all of you, I really do.
Does anybody else have questions?
Hey, Mayor, I just want to clarify the financial disclosure reports that I filed.
Oh,
I
yes.
just wanted to,
Yeah,
I filed amendments,
There were a number of
There were-
deficiencies in your,
well, there were two. One was, I live in the Helton Center. I lived on the 6th floor. We moved up to the 11th floor. We moved up in January. I was filling this out in March, but you fill it out for the following year. We had a contract to sell 601. So in my mind, we live in 1101, I want to reveal that. 601, we have a contract to sell. Unfortunately, the furnace in 601 broke, so it took longer to sell. But ultimately, it sold. This is not an investment property. We just moved from one floor to the other floor. The other one on the SCA,
And to clarify, 601 was always listed prior to that.
601 was listed prior.
yeah,
It was always listed right up until the time. It's just, when I filled it out in March of the year, I was thinking, well, now I'm at 1101, so I'll put 1101 down, and I'm not gonna, 601 is being sold,
so you weren't trying to conceal anything.
absolutely not. It's not an investment property, it's not, it was my primary residence.
And
And the other one, I was appointed to the SCI, and I overlooked it, because that wasn't my primary employment, it wasn't, so I just listed all the primary, and then the second year I realized, oh, I'm getting money from the SCI, so we better list it. And I corrected that also.
so those omissions have been corrected.
Yeah, corrected, there's amended files.
As far as you know, your financial statement is up to date, is
Correct.
complete.
I believe you said, you gave us a copy.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the contract between the Housing Authority is with Will and Scholl and Spitzer. It's been with Will and Scholl and Spitzer for 40 years, not me.
Yes, and is there any, maybe your attorney can, is there any requirement, I know like for municipal attorneys, the municipal attorney has to be an individual, can't be a firm. Is there any requirement of that type in redevelopment council?
No.
Yeah.
No.
I
It's a
couldn't
special-
find anything, but
It's a specialty that, and so you want somebody who has a couple of lawyers who have that specialty.
okay.
I have one more question, just for you. Would you be willing to provide us with a copy of your corrected financial disclosure statements?
Absolutely, yes.
I think
We never provided.
No, we have.
we did provide.
We do have that, yeah.
I'll send in Mr. Joe's tomorrow.
I think it would also be helpful to clarify that the redeveloper, the applicant to become the redeveloper, is not randomly selected. They have to, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, they have to be the owner or controlling entity for the property that they're seeking to redevelop,
They
right?
have to have some evidence that they control the bulk of the property.
So this is not just some random entity coming in, filing an application, say, hey, pick me, pick me. In this particular case, AST, for example, which did the Plum 2.
They own the property.
They own the property. They're the redeveloper because they own the property and they fit the categories. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So it's not like some random entity comes in and says, I want to develop that property. They got to own it or control it.
Well, there are instances, but not in New Brunswick, where the city may control the property and say, okay, I want to take proposals from 3 or 4 developers to see what you're going to do. But that's not what's happening. In New Brunswick, 99%, New Brunswick, the developer either owns all the property or the majority of the property.
In the particular case of, for example, the Hub and Plum 2, you talked about financial requirements, you talked about making sure they can meet the requirements, but it's about what the city and the planning board did already with regard to what could be built on that property that you're really focused on, correct?
That's correct.
So when the applicant comes in, they say, we want to build 2 skyscrapers. for lack of a better word, big buildings in New Brunswick, that's not your call, is that correct?
No, all the housing authority and the redevelopment agency does is make sure it conforms with the plan. There was it says office buildings, you cannot build a use that's not permitted in the plan. So they check that, and then they check the qualifications of the redevelopers.
So it doesn't matter to the redevelopment authority, in this case the housing authority, who occupies the finished product. As long as the finished product conforms with the planning board and the city's designation for what can be built there, is that correct?
Yes, once the building is complete, we give them a certificate of completion. The housing authority's role is completely over.
So if I were a redeveloper saying I'm going to build a mall and Macy's is going to be one anchor and JCPenney's, if they still exist, is going to be the other anchor, does that matter to you?
No.
It's the owner of the mall, the controller of the mall, it's the mall.
That's who presents it, and that's who we have the agreement with. And if that's the one that if they don't build it like they're supposed to, that's the one that the housing authority would have to go after or have to terminate.
And at all times when you represented the housing authority on these redevelopment projects we discussed, you were not aware of leases or any interest that Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health or Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital had in the potential to be finished product tenants, is that correct?
That's correct. Now, subsequently, I've learned of it, but not at the time that I was representing the housing.
And even if, quite frankly, you had known that they were going to be a potential tenant, would that change your position with regard to having a financial interest or personal interest in the project?
No.
Because your deal is with you're addressing
With the developer.
the developer. So whether they choose to rent it to an individual, an entity, or a company that you happen to have some volunteer service with wouldn't affect whether that project should be permitted to
So
proceed.
we don't look at the tenants, and we can't just think of a residential project. Here's the building, 540 units. Am I supposed to then say, do I know anybody who might rent one there? Of course not, I can't keep getting.
So your sole job is to protect the board and the city
That's good.
and make sure this building gets built. And if the developer thinks he has an understanding with some particular entity or entities, or an "oh, promise me," that's not your concern.
I deal with the developer and the developer's attorney. That's who I do. That's who I negotiate with, that's who signs the agreements, and that's who I do.
So I'm going to show you this blow-up. This is the redevelopment agreement for which project? Front page.
That's for Plum 2.
Okay, and does this document confirm who the parties in interest were?
That's good.
Who-
AST was really the developer corporation. They established the urban renewal because
Can we mark that?
This is going to be RJH4.
RJH4. Why don't you do us a favor and mark those other two that we already...
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm going to circle right here in red. That's the redevelopment agency through the urban renewal entity.
That's the redeveloper.
Oh, redeveloper.
Developer.
And then-
the agencies up here, the housing authority.
So the bottom two are the parties to the redevelopment
That's
agreement.
correct.
One is guarantor, and those are related entities.
Yes, that's the parent. So Somerset Urban Renewal is a subsidiary or affiliate of AST Development.
And does Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health or Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital or you have any financial connection to those entities?
None whatsoever.
And those entities haven't changed since the redevelopment agreement was entered?
Not that I'm aware, not that I'm aware of, but not that I'm aware.
I'm going to show I'm going to mark RJH5, which is a blow-up. And these are attached to your exhibits already in your submissions.
correct.
This is RJH5. This is a redevelopment agreement, front page to a redevelopment agreement in New Brunswick.
That's correct.
Okay, and the agency, once again, is the housing authority. Who is the party to this?
New Jersey Innovation Associates LLC.
I'm going to circle that. And who is New Jersey Innovation Associates?
It's an affiliate of New Brunswick Development Corporation.
And that's DevCo.
That's correct.
And do you have any financial interest in DevCo? Are you-
DevCo is also a nonprofit corporation.
And does does Jack Morris have any involvement with DevCo?
Not that I'm aware of.
Does anyone else that you, at Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital sit on the board of DEFCO, as far as you are aware?
I don't know who sits on the board of EFCO.
Just for clarification, this is, I'm going to mark this RJH6. This is correct me if I'm wrong, this is a notice of award of a contract for legal services for redevelopment?
That's correct.
Now, it's to your attention, is that correct?
That's correct.
But does it confirm who the award of contract for legal services for
To award it to the firm of Willis, Coleman and Spitzer.
I'm going to circle that right there, is that correct?
That's correct.
And this confirms that you are not the actual appointed attorney. It's in fact Willis, Coleman and Spitzer. Willis, Coleman and Spitzer is a law firm, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And how long has Willis, Coleman and Spitzer been a law firm, to the best of your knowledge?
Well, we had a 100-year celebration about 3 years ago, so it's about 103 years.
Okay.
I've been there 59 years.
I say you haven't been there the whole time.
I know.
It's still trying.
It actually seems like it. When I started, there were 12 lawyers, and I was paid $25 a week, so you know how long it was.
And, but nevertheless, you filed financial statements because you felt, for reasons other than simply New Brunswick, is that correct? You hold other positions?
Yes, we represent the Middlesex College, for example.
Did you ever vote on any leases or occupying any property while during your service as a trustee at Robert Wood Johnson University
No.
Hospital or Barnabas Health?
No.
The meeting that was discussed where your picture was taken, you're in the back of a room attached to the complaint, which Plum 2 was discussed.
It was discussed as one of potential projects that Robert would be undertaking.
But this was not a situation where you were asked to vote on anything, is that
No, not
correct?
whatsoever. It was just a general discussion. We're building this here. We think we're buying this property here.
How, if you were to venture, if you know, how many buildings and properties does Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital and or Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health occupy in the city of New Brunswick?
I think over 20 of them.
It-
Some of it gets confusing. The Cancer Institute, for example, it's a Rutgers project. It's Cancer Institute is under Rutgers.
How many properties does Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital have across the state of New Jersey? If you could guess.
Robert Wood Johnson.
Or Barnabas Health?
Barnabas has, it's either 11 or 12 hospitals. They have ambulatory care centers. They have other developments, other joint ventures. So they're all over the state. They have 30, I think it was 33,000 employees. 37,000 now employees now.
In New Jersey.
They hired 4,000 more since I.
Does the particular location where those people happen to call their office really affect you? No personal interest in where they happen to lease their space and work?
Absolutely.
You're a resident of the city of New Brunswick, as you described, correct?
Yes, I am.
And you've been a part of its redevelopment for 40 years?
Since the Hyatt Hotel was the first one.
It's fair to say you care greatly about the city of New Brunswick?
Yes, I did.
I have no further questions.
All right. Whether you have any questions you'd like to ask?
No. Well, actually, I do, Mr. Hoffman. Did the commissioner act outside the scope of her responsibilities as a commissioner of the New Brunswick Housing Authority when dealing with any of these projects we've been talking about? Does she have, in your legal opinion, as you represent the redevelopment agency, did she have any conflict of interest with any of the entities?
No.
All right. Any other questions from the board? No? Before closing the public hearing, I would just ask the attorneys if they want to sum up in any way or make a closing statement.
I defer to you first, the Commissioner's attorney.
Members of the Ethics Board, thank you so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. I hope that you're satisfied that there has been no wrongdoing on the part of either the Commissioner or Mr. Hoffman. With regard to the financial disclosure forms, as soon as the Commissioner understood that there was an issue with them, she did immediately go in, she did fix them. I will print out copies tomorrow and I will send them to Mr. Josie. You'll see that everything's been updated. With regard to the 4 projects we've talked about tonight, so the hub, Fulton Square, Jersey Handy, and Plum 2. The commissioner has no relationship with any of these developers, has no conflict of interest. The reason that she abstained from the January meeting in the Hub project was because she heard Robert Wood Johnson, and because it is confusing because there's so many different entities of them, out of a complete abundance of caution, she said, let me abstain just to make sure. By the time the meeting rolled around, she understood that there was no conflict of interest that was regarding Barnabas Health, which is the mega parent company, and she is one of 37,000 employees under the hospital, which you can see her division isn't even on the hospital's org chart. There's just no way that she could have had any kind of financial or personal or job-related benefit as a result of having voted on any of these projects. She had no idea that either Mr. Palladino or Mr. Morris served on the Robert Wood Johnson boards. There is no evidence that she's done anything wrong. If anything, it shows that she was overly cautious in the January 22 meeting because she wanted to make sure that there would be no conflict. She was never cautioned by Mr. Hoffman or any other attorney that there was a conflict of interest. And she was doing the best that she could and looking out for the residents of New Brunswick and trying to do something good. She's volunteering her time just like all of you on a volunteer board that is unpaid. And it's a time-consuming, thankless job a lot of times. And she's doing a great job, and she's proud of the work that the Housing Authority is doing. And we thank you again for your time. If you have any additional questions, please just let us know through Mr. Jost, or you can reach out to me directly, and we'd be happy to help you.
So the commissioner does not receive any compensation for serving as a commissioner?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to the testimony tonight. I think if we didn't cover it in our lengthy submission, the documents there, and I hope we've answered all of your questions to your satisfaction. Mr. Hoffman is probably the quintessential example tonight of no good deed goes unpunished, because he has spent 20 years volunteering for hospital boards. He then also spends 40 years working for the city of New Brunswick through our law firm to provide legal advice. Attorneys have special rules governing conflicts of interest, established by the Supreme Court of New Jersey, called the Rules of Professional Conduct. And every day we evaluate conflicts of interest, and we turn down work because we cannot take work when there's a conflict of interest. And we study those things, and we keep very detailed records to make sure that we don't cross those ethical lines. RPC 1.7 is the applicable rule concerning attorney conflicts of interest involving current matters. And had Mr. Hoffman recognized a conflict under that, he certainly would not be handling this case. And he said clearly, which is the law, had Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital, Barnabas Health, been involved in this deal as a redeveloping entity or a party or an owner of this redevelopment or a true partner, one where there's a contractual relationship, he would not have provided advice. He would have stepped aside and had somebody else do it, because I can tell you we do that every day in concerning those hospital entities. We do not take certain types of work involving those hospitals. We cannot. But he has done everything right. He did not engage in a transaction. He didn't vote, but he provided the process by which the commissioners did and properly voted on this project and did their jobs, and he did his job by analyzing the project, presenting the redeveloping entity to the board, making sure the I's were dotted, the T's were crossed, there was proper financing so these projects would be built by qualified developers consistent with what the city of New Brunswick has said should be built there. Office buildings, in certain cases, technology hubs, the like. He did his job with no conflict of interest. The fact that he learned later that there was a 0.5% lease that was being considered by one entity didn't change the fact that when he did the work, it was proper, it was authorized, there was no conflict of interest. And even still, as he said, he doesn't get paid by Robert Wood Johnson or University Hospital or Barnabas Health. He's a volunteer. And as a volunteer, he doesn't fit within the definition of someone who has a financial interest in the organization. Does he want the organization to succeed? Does he want New Brunswick to succeed? Does he want what's best for the citizens of this state, this county, and this city to succeed? He lives here. He cares about it. He told you he's moved from one apartment in the same building to the other. He probably could have moved to Florida, but he didn't. He stayed here, and he's continuing to do this. And quite frankly,
He just moved on up. That's
yeah. And I can tell you that, I think that the situation here is quite clear. There is no conflict of interest, and he did the right thing. And Chairman DeSantis did the right thing. What I'd ask you to do, though, is understand that when filling out these financial disclosures, take a look at what he had. It was all there. The apartment was there. The SCI income was there. It was just not on the right years. That's not an intentional omission, and it's been corrected. And I appreciate the opportunity, because but for the notice, we wouldn't have been able to correct it, so it's been corrected. So for all those reasons, if you'd like to hear from anybody else, if you have any follow-up questions, but I think we've satisfied the needs and hope we can move on from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have to thank Mr. Cradaville for bringing that to your attention.
Yes?
Before we close the hearing, could you just help us out and mark those?
Yes, I'll take care of that. I did agree to do that for you.
I can tell you, I can understand why it's confusing, because you have all these different entities that are established in order to get tax
This is
not
MH.
Unbelievable.
the agency who's, it's a company.
So this
the
one
company owns that
is 4.
entity, but it just sets up like a single purpose.
MH,
entity
right?
for that project.
Or is it RMH?
MH, MH4.
We did that
And then it's on, and then it's 6.
one. Right.
So I guess we'll keep these blow-ups here at the City Hall.
Yep, you can keep them.
Let them figure out where to file.
You might go hand gliding with that one later.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
At this time, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
We have a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion by Barbara. Second was by Liz. Angel. All in favor? All right, now we need a motion to go into executive session to discuss. By the way, I don't anticipate any decision being rendered tonight, so just want to let you know that. So there's really no
Of course,
reason for you to hang around.
board's discretion on what they want. I'm not asking for, I would never demand.
Just wanted to let you know so you don't hang around.
I'm going to leave, this was a blow-up letter of one of our exhibits. I'm going to leave it with you, because maybe you really want to make, the hang glider after all, but
You referred to those.
we referred to this.
You want to mark them? Go ahead, mark.
This would be RJH7. We can do it, this is just a letter from DEFCO. It's 2 pages. I'll mark it for you.
Yeah, mark.
Yeah, it is an exhibit to the submission.
Yeah, these also are our attachments too.
I'll do 7A and 7B. 7A is page 1, 7B is page 2. Okay.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Okay, then we need a motion. The motion will be going to executive session in accordance with the rules and procedures of the City of New Brunswick Board of Ethics, and also under the Open Public Meetings Act, litigation exception. That's also permits us to go into executive session.
Motion to go into executive session.
Barbara?
Motion.
Motion. Zach?
I'll second that.
Second, Angel. Second. Now we need a roll call vote on this one. Anytime you go into executive, you need a roll call vote. Let's see. Okay, Barbara Blackwell,
Yes.
Anthony,
Yes.
Angel.
Yes.
Sorry, I should say the whole names. Anthony Jones, Angela Ramon, Don Pinkavich,
Yes.
and Monica Reyes.
Yes.
All right, so we'll go into executive session. Can we have a motion to go back into public session?
I'll make a motion to go back into public session.
I'll second it.
Angel? Roll call, since it's executive. Let's see. Barbara Blackwell,
Yes.
Anthony Jones,
Yes.
Angela Romano,
Yes.
Don McCavitt,
Yes.
and Monica Reyes.
Yes.
All right, we're back in public session. So does somebody want to make a motion to authorize the attorney to work on a resolution reflecting the board's discussions in executive session, subject to further consideration and review by the board at the next scheduled meeting?
I'll make that motion.
And I will second that.
Resolution. Okay. Second was Barbara.
Yeah.
And we better have a roll call on that one. Barbara Blackwell,
Yes.
Anthony Jones,
Yes.
Angela Romano,
Yes.
Don Pinkavich,
Yes.
and Monica Reyes.
Yes.
All right. And so that takes care of that. Anything else to discuss with the board?
I don't have anything. Anybody?
No. All right, any public comment? Surprise.
Good evening, members of the board. Charles Cradaville, New Brunswick. I want to start by saying thank you to the board for calling witnesses and asking them good questions, and thanks for taking a couple hours out of your day to be here and hear this matter. I think we learned that the disclosure violations were real, but it's likely that they were honest mistakes that unfortunately happen all too often. I'm obviously much more concerned about the conflict of interest and the separation that's supposed to exist between private and public. And I'm very troubled to hear some of the testimony from Mr. Hoffman and see his answers in the lengthy document you were provided. I want to draw your attention to a specific issue. And I know you did a great job of laying out the timeline and talking about Plum 2. And I'll note that in his answer through his counsel, Mr. Hoffman says, quote, "At the time Mr. Hoffman provided legal advice on the Plum 2 redevelopment agreement, he had no information indicating that the hospital was a party to a lease of space in the building." And I would draw your attention to a December 10th, 2019 letter from Thomas Kelso, the attorney for the developer, to John Clark, the executive director of the New Brunswick Housing Authority. And in that letter, it says, quote, "The redeveloper will develop this project with the intent to enter into a master lease with Robert Wood Johnson Hospital." So in terms of the timeline, that's before the January 2020 meeting where Mr. Hoffman definitely provided legal advice to the board. And one would think he would have read the cover letter and reviewed the application that was before that board. But even if he failed to, I was at the meeting on January 22nd, 2020, and I recorded the meeting, and I encouraged the board to review that video because I raised the conflict issue. And Mr. Hoffman acknowledged that he had significantly more knowledge than he led everyone to believe about the potential tenancy of his hospital, where he's on the board as the treasurer. I'll also just note that the Robert Wood Johnson board meeting that's referenced here, July 14th, 2021, is not the typical board meeting. Under state law, hospitals have to have one meeting a year where the public is allowed to attend and give testimony, and that was that meeting. And I just want to clarify that it was not presented as Plum 2, here's a project we're thinking about doing. It was quite the contrary. It was presented as, after many years, we're finally ready to move forward on this expansion. And so that was another meeting where I did record the meeting and did share the recording online. So I'd encourage you to review that meeting and see how that comports with how things were presented to you. Because, you know, the reality is this is actually a great example of failing to hold developers accountable. And I'll explain why. Mr. Hoffman touched on it a little bit when he talked about requiring a guarantor for projects because, quote, who would we go after if, you know, the project doesn't materialize, if they don't deliver on what they've promised the authority? This is an example where AST Development had a plan for the site. It was sort of 3 different projects on the site. It's a long rectangular block between French and Somerset Street and Plum and Prospect. And I'm sure those of you who've lived in town for a long time remember it used to be home to the last Hungarian restaurant in the city. And unfortunately, all those properties were bulldozed, and AST's plan was to build a medical office building on French Street, which they did, to build the parking authority, a new large deck, 800 space parking deck, which they did. And for that other side of the site, the Somerset Street side of the site, they actually had a plan for housing. And they entered into a redevelopment agreement with the housing authority to deliver that project. Got to be 2008 or earlier. And they didn't deliver. And it, you know, now here we are 15 years later, and they finally have delivered something very different than the original project, right? They're building a building of entirely medical offices, basically very similar to the one they built on the French Street side. And we have to ask ourselves the question of who let them not deliver anything for a decade. And I'll note that the first meeting referenced here on Plum 2, December 18, 2019, it's obviously not the first time that a plan for that site was before the Housing Authority because there's all this stuff from the 2000s. What they did on December 18, 2019 is at the recommendation of John Hoffman, they de-designated French Street Urban Renewal LLC as the redeveloper and designated Somerset Street Urban Renewal LLC as the new redeveloper. And it's my understanding both of these companies are owned and controlled by the same people, so it was just a little bit of a switcheroo where the company that had failed us was de-designated and a new company owned by the same people was approved to do a totally different project that was much taller than what had been contemplated and zero housing and all medical offices. So this is really an example of John Hoffman recommending to the Housing Authority Board that this developer who had a poor track record didn't deliver what they promised in the redevelopment agreement to basically let them off the hook for their dereliction and then push through a new project that would be all offices to ultimately be leased by Robert Wood Johnson Hospital, his hospital. So I think if you look at the timeline in light of these things, you might come to very different conclusions than you would if you only listened to Mr. Hoffman's side of it. So I would encourage you to please review the relevant Housing Authority meetings and the Robert Wood Johnson annual meeting of 2021. And the only other points I wanted to make are procedural, so I did want to just share and confirm whether or not Mr. Jost got my emails. There's a couple of outstanding issues. I did bring them up for everybody. So I guess the first one is on the topic of tonight's hearing. I bring to your attention the standard operating procedures of the board, which discuss soliciting written questions from the public when you're having testimony. I mean, obviously there were a lot of questions I would have liked to hear asked tonight, but no one ever solicited any questions, and the notice of the meeting did not specify who was going to testify or that the board wanted questions. So I would suggest that 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 should have been done, and it's disappointing it wasn't done. I did email Mr. Jost shortly before 2 p.m. today to raise this issue and didn't hear back. And then the other outstanding issue is the cases from 2015 and 2018, where I've been trying just to get the outcome documented. As you know, Councilman Glenn Fleming was the subject of both matters, and in one case, there's a resolution on file in the clerk's office that's not signed. And then the 2018 resolution, there's no record of it at all. They can't produce one. So I've shared my video of the meeting where the text of the resolution was read into the record in its entirety. And, I'm just seeking, what do I have to do to get this document?
I did get your emails. Unfortunately, I was ill, and then I was preoccupied with this matter. So I will get to the other resolution. And I apologize for the delay. As far as the written questions, I thought you were kind of a veteran of these proceedings, and I was kind of expecting you to submit written questions. Now, maybe I'm sorry. Maybe I should have alerted you, but I honestly thought if you had questions, you would submit them, and we would have considered them. And procedurally, maybe you're right. Maybe we should have solicited, but I know you've submitted them in the past, at least on one case.
I don't believe so, but nevertheless, I understand it's an honest mistake. It's sort of a unusual rule, but going forward, if there's another hearing, I think you would want to tell the public who's going to testify and ask for questions in writing, because that's what the SOP says.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I've shared a lot of information with you, and I do appreciate all of your good questions and appreciate you hearing me out with my additional comments tonight. I just encourage you to look further into it, and I will, of course, be happy to share any records you would like. For instance, that letter from Mr. Kelso to Mr. Clark, or my videos, which are available.
Send me a copy
That was
of that.
December 10th of what year?
December 10, 2019. This was the
Because I don't think we received that
right.
in our packet. I don't think we had.
Correct. Yeah, I was pulling it up on my phone when I heard what was being said tonight, because it was really, I think, not fair to say Mr. Hoffman had no idea what was going to happen with that building, or he sort of presented it as like, how do I know who's going to rent a building? Well, if there's a 3-page letter and the developer's saying we intend to have a master lease with Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital, you should have had some idea that Robert Wood Johnson was deeply associated with the project, whether or not it came up in a board meeting, which I wouldn't really know because I'm only allowed at the one a year. But the Housing Authority, they accept an application, as Mr. Hoffman acknowledged. Application came with a cover letter. Cover letter was very clear. The developer intends to lease the property to Robert Wood Johnson. And that's what came up in the meeting. So the statements in this answer saying, we had no idea, is really not fair, and doesn't comport with the written record or the video record that I'd encourage you to review.
Would you mind sending that
The
to
link?
Mr. Jost so that we
Yeah,
can...
if you send that,
Do you mind?
I will. I'll send it all to you tomorrow.
I
Thank
may
you.
ask the other side to comment on it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That'd be fair. But,
Yeah. And that,
Can I ask him a question?
Sure.
I'm very confused as to what you gave us.
yeah, sure.
Can you tell me exactly what I'm looking
The 2 emails.
for? Okay, no,
I think that just got.
lost.
That was
Extra
just,
papers.
I think, extra papers.
That's it.
Oh, maybe I gave you too much. But yeah, there was just 2 emails I wanted to share with you. One, raising the concern about the written questions being solicited, and 2, just this outstanding matter with the...
I was probably out of the office when you sent this. Apologize.
Apology accepted, and I understand that this matter's already taken longer than it's supposed to take, so I'm not in any rush to force the issue, but I did just want to raise that for the record, and happy to assist the board in their investigation.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, if there's no further public comment, then I guess, Mr. Chairman, a motion would be in order.
Yeah, can we get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second?
I'll second that.
8:20. All in favor?
Aye.
I don't know my dates in May if we're looking. you said about a month or so.
Yeah, I'll have to check on that, because
Yeah, me too.
there's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff to put together here,
Yeah.
so,
When are you going to look, what,
excuse me?
when are you thinking of us getting together again, or is you, we have to see once you...
Probably the earliest would be a month and a half, maybe 2 months. It's going to take some time to put. And
And
then,
review his video and everything else you
Absolutely,
have.
absolutely.
Thank you, appreciate it.
all right,